Okay, so now that we have things up and running, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on here. So what we have by default is going to be a little bit different than if you followed the official React Native getting started instead of using create React Native app. And I'm going to talk a little about why that is. Basically, with create React Native app, we're using something called Expo, which you can see right here. And Expo sort of sits between React Native and your code. And what it does is it basically makes it so you don't have to have all of the project files here. Now, typically, if you were to start a React Native project through React Native's own getting started, you would have both the entire Android project files as well as the entire iOS project files. Now, the good thing about having those is that you could pop open those iOS files at any given point and start to go to work. If you code in Swift or Java or now Kotlin for Android, you could just pop those open and start working in those native environments. Now, that's not entirely possible right now. However, there is a command with Expo to get us those folders if we need them. So really what it's doing is it's saving our hard drive a bunch of space because we don't have to have all those files, but it's also saving us a whole bunch of headache from having to deal with a whole bunch of extra stuff, and it sort of sits in between there. Now, I've built React Native apps with and without Expo, and the reason why I'm doing Expo for this series is simply because it's much easier and there's much less to get in the way. So as you can see here, this is what this Expo is doing. Now, why is React Native different from something like Cordova or PhoneGap or one of these solutions? Well, most of those solutions interact natively with your phone, but are essentially just a web view or a web browser, and the app is still essentially just HTML and JavaScript. And that's not necessarily the case with React Native. When we use something like a view or a text, when this compiles, it's actually getting translated into real native code. So you aren't running a web app in a shell, you're running a native app, which is why React Native is so exciting. Okay, so that's a little bit of foundational knowledge about React Native. Now let's give a little bit of foundational knowledge about React. What we have here with this project is we don't have any configuration we have to do. We didn't have to set up, you'll notice this Babel RC, we didn't have to set up Watchman, we didn't have to set up any of the stuff that compiles our files. React Native takes care of all of that. So what's good here is that we get to use straight up JavaScript. So when you see something like import React from React, this is ES6 JavaScript and it's really, really nice. And we have import style sheet text view from React Native. And this is how most of your files are going to look. They're going to start off with some import statements and most likely importing first and foremost React, and then most likely maybe a view. I think view is probably the most used component. You could consider it like a div. And then we also have text, which you could consider like a paragraph tag or a heading tag or really any sort of text tag. It doesn't denote any sort of semantics. It's just this is text, right? And lastly, we have style sheet where we're using a method called create, and stylesheet.create, it accepts basically an object here, and that could be considered a class, right? Even though this isn't CSS, you could consider this something like a class, right? This container word sort of defines what this view is, and we're using it with style equals styles.container. So that, of course, is going into this constant variable, which is an object. It's grabbing this container, and then it's setting the following properties, such as background color, align items, justify content, and this flex. Let's fire this application up in an iOS situation. I'm going to use iOS because I'm programming on a Mac right now, and it's going to just fire up a little bit quicker. The Android emulators can be a little slow, although they have certainly gotten better. So we can do, just like we did before, npm run iOS, hit enter, and this is going to not only start our packager, which compiles our code, but it's also going to fire up our simulator and get us started once more. Now, if you do not have a working simulator, head back to the video where I show you how to set up the simulator and the iOS process. I think we just install Xcode and that's pretty much it. Okay, and you notice we're getting an error. There's a problem loading. Try again. And we can click try again. It's going to crash. You'll notice here that we had a fail to start simulator, exit with a non-zero code 60. You know what? Stuff like this happens. This is the nature of this. This is really complex stuff that's going on. And sometimes these things don't always work 100%. But our simulator is already up and running. So now you'll see that this time when I restarted, it worked no problem. Now that's not to say you have to have the simulator up and running to get this going. First and foremost, it should work. But sometimes, it just doesn't, right? Something went before something else, things weren't talking to each other. But that's just how it goes. You'll notice here, we have this finished building and we're getting our hello world. So let's talk about our code here. I'm going to give some React basics. Essentially what we have, as we discussed in the last couple of videos, we have a class which extends React component, and we have a render function, and we're returning something out of that render function, and what we're returning sort of looks like HTML. Now, what's cool about React and the entire way you think in React is sort of this, you can create components that you could consider as like Lego pieces that you can reuse and combine to create different things, right? And each one of these has sort of a parent-child relationship. Just sort of like the DOM structure on the web or anything like that, you drill down and it goes from the parent component to child component. And thus you would pass data from parent to child by use of something called props. So what we want to do right now is we want to create another component and just simply have it export this hello world text. Now that's not useful at all and we're going to end up deleting it, but it's going to be showing you basically how we get going. So right now, since this is a small app, I'm going to create a new file at the root of our project. Okay, I'm going to make sure I'm clicked off of everything here so nothing's selected. Click the plus new file, click the plus new file, and let's name this hello.js. And just like app.js, the first thing we're going to want to do is import React from, and then it's going to be from React. Notice how it's not from React Native. We're importing the actual framework React. Now next, we're going to import some things from React Native. We're going to import, and this time I'm using curly brackets. If you're not familiar with this syntax, what the curly brackets do is it's sort of non-default imports. So we have to import them individually within brackets. So we want to import a view, which we explained was like a div. We want to import a text, and that's it. Now, so I finish this off with a comma, and we're going to say from, and now these come in from React Native. Okay. So you could have copied and pasted that almost directly from the one above, but it's nice to learn how to write it. And here we can say export default. Notice how I'm exporting a default. And now we need to say what we're exporting. We're exporting a class with the name of hello, not all caps, just capitalizing the first letter. And then we can say it extends React.component. Now notice how component is capitalized. And we're going to wrap this off with some curly brackets, and we now have our class. Now in a class like this, you'll have a bunch of methods, including some lifecycle methods and things like that happen before, but the most important one if you want to display something is the render function, which will have two parentheses and then a bracket, and then we need to return. We'll have some parentheses. And inside of this view, I'm going to have a text, okay? And this text is just going to be hello from hello.js. And we can close this text component. Okay, so just like that, this component does nothing, but it's our first component. And so we have this component here, and we can head back to app, where we're going to want to import it. Notice how we exported it from hello. We're going to want to import it from app. So we're going to say import hello from And then we can actually just give this instead of quotes, we're going to say dot / because that's where it's located within the current directory, hello. And we can then wrap this off with a semicolon. Now it's always nice after you do something like this, right? I imported a bunch of code to head over to your iTerm and see if everything's headed all right. You'll notice I'm not getting any weird errors here. Now, because of that, we can actually use the hello component. Now, components work a lot like HTML tags. So just like this text, which I'm deleting, I'm going to say hello. And notice how I'm closing it off with a / and then a greater than caret. So if we were to have children within hello, you'd be using it more like this view tag, but instead we're using it more like a line break tag or something in HTML where it auto closes. So now what we should see in our app is hello from hello.js. Now this is really super nice because we can reuse this anywhere we want. We can just spam this a whole bunch, and now hello from hello.js has been output 4 times. So it can just show you that essentially when you're working in React, you're creating these components that you'll reuse over and over again, and maybe sometimes you'll just use them once, but it's still nice to have things separated as their own component. It keeps your code organized, it'll be easier to debug, and you'll have less headaches overall. Okay, so these are some React and React Native basics. If you already know React, then I'm sure a lot of this was just easy stuff that you've done 100 times before, but if you've never learned React, this stuff can be very weird at first, right? It sort of looks like HTML, sort of doesn't. But the cool thing is that it's easy to pick up, and it doesn't take very long before you get it, right? Before it's just like, I understand why this is so well liked. So here we have our component, hello, and app.js. Now in the next few videos, we're going to be talking a little bit more about React Native specific stuff. We're going to be dialing into some of the React Native built-in components. We're going to be talking a whole lot about designing and styling your apps. And at the end of it, we're going to have a real live working application that'll be both native for iOS and Android. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. If you have any questions, leave a comment in this video. Hit me up at Twitter or Facebook at Level Up Tutorials. Thanks so much for watching. If you would like to see this entire series, head over to store.leveluptutorials.com and purchase it. It is available, or you can become a subscriber and watch it that way as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.